Good morning. My name is John Jolly. I'm part of the SUSE Linux engineering group, specifically tasked with RDMA and Open Fabrics. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how the SUSE Linux Enterprise Edition is working right now with the OFS distribution. So let's go ahead and continue on with this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about what our enterprise product is, and some of our other products as well. What SUSE and our enterprise and what we're trying to get out to the customer. A little bit about our development process, how we get these things in, and a little bit of information on how you can possibly participate in this. There we go. And so SUSE is actually an acronym. It was started in 1992 by 3 mathematicians and a software engineer, which kind of explains a lot about the distribution. But it stood for System- und Softwareentwicklung. Entwicklung. See, somebody here knows better than I do. I should have known. Thank you. But it's pronounced, the S's are Z's, so you technically pronounce it SUSE. SUSE. At least that's the way the Germans pronounce it. I'm not German. I simply pronounce it SUSE. Really, to be perfectly fair, it's however you feel like pronouncing it. I get a lot of people who call it SUSE. And you know, if you want to pronounce it SUSE, I'll respond to that just as well. We really have 2 major Linux distributions that we work with. We have our enterprise distribution. This is the one that is stable and secure, has regular updates and paid support and such. But we also have an open distribution called OpenSUSE. And I'm going to talk a little bit about both of them this time around, and the similarities and contrast between the development models. We also have several products that, of course, can help in whatever situation you find yourself in. The one that's really going to matter here is the one at the bottom, the Open Build Service, which is not a for-pay product. It's perfectly open, and you may find useful. The translation between the LibreOffice presentation and Microsoft product is not doing very well. We'll get through it. So, OpenSUSE is a community-driven distribution. This is an open source, true open source product. It is driven by a board of 5 members, which really has absolutely no control over the engineering of the product. They're more of a guidance. They settle disputes. They make sure that it moves along. But all the technical work, all the engineering work is done in an open source manner. There are working groups that get together and form packages, get things in, decide on what's going to be included. But all of this work is done through something called the Open Build Service. This is a website. You can go to it, build.opensuse.org. And what it is basically a revision control system that builds your software for you, from source code to package, all in one nice, neat little chain. Anybody can take a package that's already out there and branch it, or create a new package for that matter. And I'm going to give you an example of that later on, specifically in regards to libfabric, the OFI working group initiative. Once you've made changes, you can submit them back to the parent for acceptance. But here's the wonderful thing about this build service. It builds for multiple architectures. Sure, it builds for SLES and it builds for OpenSUSE, but it builds for Red Hat Enterprise Linux, for Fedora, Arch, Scientific Linux, CentOS, even Debian packages can be created by this Open Build Service. Now, I have to admit, a lot of this is based on theory from my personal experience. I don't go to a lot of effort to build Debian packages in my line of work. I have to admit it's not a center of focus for me, but I've heard it works pretty nice. And then these final package binaries are publicly available. Anybody can download them. It says there at the bottom it is not officially supported by SUSE. This is not something that SUSE is going to, you can't call up and say, oh, I've got a package installed from the Open Build Service. We'd like you to spend some time to figure out why it's broken. We will smile sweetly and say, you're going to have to figure that one out on your own. But there is an undertone here about the official. The official is a very, very key term. Within SUSE specifically, we have been told that anything we do in the enterprise distribution had better be mirrored to the OpenSUSE product as well. We have to make that effort as an engineering organization. So, while it may not be supported, there's a very good chance that whatever's going into SLES is also going into OpenSUSE. Now, the enterprise. The enterprise server was actually, distribution was actually created in 2000 for the IBM S390. That was the first architecture it was built for. A year later, it was actually built for the Intel, but its foundation is the OpenSUSE distribution. A lot of the cutting, bleeding edge innovation that goes into OpenSUSE ends up in SLES once it's been tried and tested and proven. The enterprise distribution main intent is to be mature and stable, much like Doug talked about with Red Hat. This is something that's supposed to not break. And so we do not regularly accept non-upstream changes. We follow pretty much the exact same policy that Red Hat does when it comes to upstream changes. If it's upstream, then it's a good chance it's been through the regular process of peer review, of proper testing, and at that point we feel comfortable accepting it into our enterprise distribution. Now mind you, everything I talk about when it comes to the enterprise distribution does not necessarily match the OpenSUSE distribution, the free one. The free one can have all sorts of fun things. We try to keep the kernel-specific changes upstream as much as possible, but there are a lot of changes that happen in OpenSUSE that we would not accept in the enterprise. For each major and minor release, we go through a very intense and rigorous feature selection process where we decide on whether a feature really is going to be suited for this. And this really comes into play strongly with OFED. When it comes to the OFED distribution, we want to make sure that the features we're bringing in are unified, especially whenever it comes to things such as a feature update that's happening in the kernel that must also have a corresponding user space library update. We've had a lot of trouble in the past where we will accept a user space update and it's broken. We get reports that there's something desperately wrong with it. We come to find out that the accompanying kernel update was never mentioned. And so now we follow a very close process of making sure that any feature that is suggested in either user space or kernel space, that everything it is holistically looked at from all points of view. One of the things we try to do during the feature process is work very closely with the partners, specifically HCA vendors, to make sure that the features they want in the kernel are included in the next release. Now, I'm sure there are a few vendors out here who are probably saying, yeah, we've been through that process. You guys are a bit of a hard nose. You tend to take a look at a feature and go, not right now. That's not going to work for us. You have to remember that we are trying to balance the wonderful new technology that you're coming out with the stability of our particular distribution. As long as we can match that, as long as we know that that feature that you've created is tried, is tested, is upstream, more than likely we can accept that feature into the next release. Now, of course, the big thing about SLES is when you have security fixes, when you have updates, it happens in SLES first. OpenSUSE usually follows very quickly, but we take security and stability very seriously in our enterprise distribution. So I want to talk a little bit about the kernel build process so that you understand what we're doing. This is pretty true for both OpenSUSE and SLES, just so you're aware. Git is our primary source code maintenance system. We use the Git system primarily because it works very well when you're working with different repositories, upstream included. And as Doug had mentioned, if it's in Git, for one, like upstream in Git, patches in upstream Git can easily be moved to the Git repository that we use. We use a base Linux kernel, and we end up with 10 to 15,000 patches in our distribution when we're done with this. We have a program that we run called sequence patch. And for SLES 10 SP4, which is currently in development right now, that process on slow I/O can take 15 to 20 minutes just simply to run through the patches and make sure they're all in order. But what it does is it makes a very nice, what's called a quilt patch set, and we can go through and manipulate the patches nice and easily at that point. SLES 11 SP4. Why did I say SLES 10 SP4? Oh my gosh, yeah. Yeah, SLES 11 SP4. Thank you. We specify that through the series conf. But when we finish, what we do with the kernel patches, we tar and zip those up and submit those to the build service. And at that point, the build service goes ahead and creates a package. This varies slightly from our regular packages in that our regular packages the source code is immediately checked in directly to the build service. Whereas the kernel, we maintain the kernel sources in a different repository, Git repository. We have a rigorous quality control with the kernel development. Patch headers must be complete. There's lots of information that's required for each patch to make sure that we can keep track of why it's in there, where it came from, and who made the change. KBI failures. Changes to the KBI or build failures must be fixed. There's no way this proceeds. And this actually becomes a real problem for somebody here like me in the US. I go ahead and make a change at 3 or 4 in the afternoon. Everything looks fine on my system. I go home, go to bed. Next morning I come in. The Germans have been up for 6 hours fussing over a particular break that I caused on an architecture I didn't think of testing on initially. And so they tend to be very strict, and no development work can continue until those things are fixed. I'm better at those things, by the way. I do remember there is a power architecture occasionally. And again, strict upstream only policy, except in specific, very well-defined circumstances. And those are even eliminated or removed as soon as physically possible. So why all this effort? Well, stability, stability, stability. That's what the mantra is within the SUSE offices. We want to make sure that this is not causing problems within the system. And when you're talking high-performance computing and large-scale systems, this becomes extraordinarily important. You want to maintain things such as the greater than 6 days of human intervention. We have a goal towards zero downtime. And as we all know, German engineering is legendary. I have to put a caveat here. It was a German who sent me this. He said, early on in my working career with the Germans, I'd tell a joke in a meeting and it would fall dead. I go, what? What did I do wrong? And my manager would take me aside later and say, we don't tell jokes like that. I'm sorry, I'm an offensive American. So they regularly taunt me about my sense of humor. Now, how does this affect you? Well, we want you to know that RDMA and high-performance networking is very important to us. We have customers. We have paying customers that are asking for better InfiniBand, Rocky, and iWarp integration. And we want to keep those customers happy. And personally, I get a lot of satisfaction when somebody comes up to me and says, hey, you know, that particular driver issue, we upgraded and it worked. Thank you. That was great. Or we just installed OFED and what do you know, the drivers appeared and OpenMPI just simply did its job. But we need your expertise. We don't have the resources, or honestly the ability at the moment, I don't have this kind of training like you do, to configure a 160,000 node test system. I have a relatively small setup, and actually right now a relatively small setup of particularly old hardware, sadly. We are trying to get an upgraded lab, and I'll talk about that in a moment. You know best how you want to see this work, and we need to know that information. Now, what has been done right so far? So far, we've seen huge improvement in upstream kernel submissions. Thank you. Thank you for actively participating in getting these things upstream. Better user space integration with the mainline kernel. We appreciate the OFED 3.12 release. Our SUSE, our SLES 12 release actually implemented 3.12 OFED pretty much the way it was released by you. And we appreciate that. That really made our job easy because you had gone through the effort to make sure the user space package worked with the 3.12 kernel. We could just simply take the 3.12 kernel, take the user space packages, and it worked. So thank you. That's been a great help. Going forward, though, we'll talk a little bit more about this. There's some update issues that we still need to take care of. Patch quality has been greatly improved, mainly because of the upstream participation. Within SUSE specifically, our feature acceptance process, we've had a lot of vendor help with that. We really appreciate Intel and Chelsea and Mellanox for participating in that and helping us get the best features into our distribution. And honestly, our communication with OFA. We try to participate where we can, and the OFA keeps us updated, and we do appreciate that. Let me give you an example of something we're doing. After hearing Monday's talks regarding the libfabric library, I figured I'd take a look at this and see what I could do. What I did was I took the link to the GitHub library and created a very small package under our open build service. And it built. And actually it stopped building because somebody had made a submission and broke it. But then it started building again when somebody fixed that problem. But it only took a few minutes to create this brand new package on the open build service. The moment I created this, it created the binary packages and published them publicly. You can download them from those web addresses right now if you have those distributions. And honestly, if you want to build it on other distributions, you're welcome to branch my project and make whatever changes you need to make Debian packages, to make Red Hat packages. I'm not going to stop you from messing around with this. I can't stop you from messing around with it, honestly. Yes, those are colons in the path. Please don't judge me. But the open build service makes these things available now. It's nice to be able to have a Git repository and have source code available. And we're all intelligent, technical people here. Everybody knows how to download, do the config, make, install steps to get a package installed. But we have tools available that make this a one-step process for you, where all you have to do is install an RPM, and voila, you've got the package ready to go. So actually, the way this is working is, I've actually set up the package to look at the upstream Git repository. Every time there is an upstream Git repository change, it rebuilds that package. And it actually reports success or failure depending on what the problem is. But there is not a source package directly in the project. It is just simply pulling from the Git repository every time a modification is made. Now, once we have a stable release of libfabric, which I understand is coming soon, we can actually lock the version into this project, so it always builds the 1.0 libfabric that you so choose. But this can be true for everything that is in the OFED distribution. Everything that's in the OFED distribution can be made a project in the OpenSUSE build service. And actually, a vast majority already is. You can actually find most, in fact all of OFED is in the OpenSUSE build service right now. I'll have to get the address, post it later. So, feel free to use our tools. We provide these things. The great thing is, it's using our hardware to do these builds. That's even the kernel builds. These kernel builds tend to be awfully resource intensive. And no, we provide the hardware to build the binaries for you. So talk to us. That's how you get a hold of us. I'm not the only guy who works on this. We've got Philip Thomas, who's actually starting on the user space. He did most of the user space work for SLES 12. We have our product manager, Eno Krumreich, who loves to have customers tell him what needs to happen so he can tell me what I need to do. And Philip Oswald here in the US, who works directly with partners. Some of you are probably very familiar with him. He's a regular dynamo. Is there any questions?
Go back to the previous slide.
I would love to. Go ahead.
Before that. Thanks.
You bet. Apparently you answered them all for me, Doug. By the way, beautiful choice of shirt color. Thanks, man. If there's no other questions, thank you very much.